Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. Yesterday, I had one of the videos in which I discussed some of the audios brought up, recorded by Brett Mouvet. And this afternoon, I would like to start with another one of those audios, and then we'll comment on it.
That's a good question. In terms of the opposition, look, the opposition is too fragmented in Zimbabwe, and the opposition has been bought and paid for, and it is now controlled by ZANU-PF. That's a long story, but let me start somewhere. ZANU-PF controls the police, the army, prisons, Judiciary Services Committee, which means courts, judges, and it controls ZEC, Zimbabwe Electoral Commission. Now, if a regime controls all those things, ask yourself, do you think that an election is going to be able to remove that regime? That's the first question you must ask yourself. So let's not discuss opposition. Let's not discuss all of that. Let's just discuss background. Triple C, as much as I did not like their leadership, people voted for Triple C. Triple C won some seats. Even by winning those seats, they were still removed by a judicial system that recognized a fake Secretary General, who then went on to recall and remove all the people that the winning candidates that Triple C had put in place and the people had voted for. So even if you are lucky enough to be allowed to campaign, which you are not allowed, if you are lucky enough to be able to campaign without being arrested, which is not the case, if you are lucky enough to be able to put your name and to register a candidate, and some people couldn't do that, if you are lucky enough that your name appears on the voters' roll, if you are lucky enough that you have enough polling stations and things are working and the voters' roll is correct and everybody that wants to vote can vote, if you are lucky enough that those things happen, they will still remove you if you win. So let's establish that fact first and foremost, to understand that to those who are thinking that an election is going to remove a regime, so first and foremost, we need to identify that. So let me continue.
Well, Ben, welcome to the program. What do you think?
Good day to everybody. Thank you for joining us. I go back to the Observer Mission reports that throughout the past 25 years, now going on 26 years, I've been saying. And basically, they've been saying your election process falls short of the international standards. And lately, it has even fallen short of our own constitutional standards. In short, they said our elections are flawed and illegal. And I agree with Brett on this one. There's just so many ifs. And yet we have not done anything to guarantee the if. After we've been given report after report, we have decided to ignore the recommendations, and these recommendations are the reforms that need to be put in place for us to finally have free, fair, and credible elections. If we cannot do anything to ensure that we finally end the case of rigged elections, then I don't think there is ever going to be a change of power, or the removal of a regime as things stand. So I have to agree with Brett to say an election right now, as things stand, with ZANU PF in control of all institutions. I mean, look, ZEC itself, their children are the ones that are running it. The courts are appointed by the man himself. I mean, surely, if we are going to say we are going to participate in such an environment, we really got to be, there has to be something wrong with us. So I agree with him to say there can never be, free, fair, and credible elections without us having to do the work to ensure that such an environment has been created.
Well, I agree with you, but I think the argument he is making here, and I've listened to some of his other audios. You need to give the background to why MDC, Triple C have been participating in those flawed elections. He started very well by saying ZANU-PF controls the police, the judiciary, ZEC, etc., etc. That is true. But MDC Triple C had the opportunity to implement the democratic reforms to end ZANU-PF's control of those institutions. You've got to ask yourself, why did they fail to implement those reforms? Because when you understand that, you can go on to the next step. You understand that ZANU-PF, Robert Mugabe, bribed Morgan Changirai and his MDC friends during the GNU so that they forgot about implementing reforms. They failed to implement even one token reform during that time. That is a historic fact. They felt they had a share in the regime as long as they are part of the system and share the spoils of power. They forgot about the reforms. And this they carried on after the GNU. Because one of the things that has been said and repeatedly is that in 2018 they were told, do not participate in those elections without reforms. And they still went ahead and participated out of greed. And we have said on this platform, quoted David Coulthard's, what David Coulthard said in his book repeatedly, where he stated clearly that the election process in Zimbabwe is so flawed, is so illegal, the only logical thing to do is to stop participating. And yet, they have been participating in those flawed elections. He himself admitted it In 2020, in 2013, the election process was so flawed, so illegal, the only logical step was to withdraw. And yet he participated. And he admits it in that quotation that's going at the bottom of your screen. He participated because of greed. Period. And so, in this particular case, we should not be asking why the opposition is participating. We should know that the opposition has been participating out of greed. So, to me, I think that is an important point, that unless you understand why the opposition has been participating, you will not understand what follows. I.e., in this case here, the consequences of participating, you give ZANU-PF legitimacy. ZANU-PF knows that as long as it allows some of the opposition leaders to participate in these flawed elections, it will get legitimacy. And that is a problem that anyone who is really serious about addressing the problems in Zimbabwe has to understand.
I think that that point you are raising was, if I can add historical historical fact to it. At a certain point during the GNU, Patrick Chinamasa bragged and said in Shona, he said, Mazuvano FDC ajaira kudya nyerere. And it was during this period that we saw the likes of Morgan Changirai get a $4 million house. We saw MDC, there are people that got into government get given, cars and so forth and monies. And I agree with Brett again to say at that point it was now very, very clear that the opposition had been bought. They were now playing for ZANU-PF. And to make matters worse, when SADA came to the MDC's door to knock and say, hey guys, we created this platform for you with the sole purpose of implementing the reforms necessary for you to stop ZANU-PF from rigging any future elections. Lo and behold, it was now Morgan Changirai
Sorry, I think we have lost Ben there. Can you hear me, Ben? We can't hear you. Sorry about that. I think what I would like to do is play another aspect of what Brett was trying to say in yesterday. I played part of it yesterday, and I've heard some feedback from some people who have been asking specifically on the issue of an armed struggle. Is an armed struggle a viable option for Zimbabwe? I'd like just to play a bit of it, of that audio that he, where Brett was arguing on that point.
So once you have identified method yekuti apa zvatiri kuita izvi hazvisi kuita, this doesn't work. Once you have identified that, you now need to look at the people and the leaders that are offering you that advice. Kana uri kurwara une chikosoro, panoda mushonga wekukosora. You don't need ARVs. You don't need ma Panadol. You don't need ma vitamins. Panoda mushonga wechikosoro. That's what's needed. So let us identify what the leaders are selling us. So the leaders that you know in Zimbabwe currently in the opposition, who is advising us to go for another election? Who is advising us to go for another demonstration? Who is advising us to go for another court application? Who is advising us to post more things on Twitter and this and that and letters to SADC, African Union, what? Who's advising us to do that? Because if people continue to advise us to do things that we know are not going to work, we must question pfungwa dzevanhu ivavo kuti dzakakwana here, yes or no. Constitution, I think it's the Judicial Services Committee or something. I think it's made up of 8 people or 9, I'm not too sure. Out of that...
Sorry about that. The point that I was trying to get there, maybe I got the wrong audio there, but in one of his audios, he did argue that an armed struggle is a viable option for Zimbabwe. I have strongly advised against an armed struggle. We will not accomplish anything from an armed struggle. We should learn from history. At the present moment, the option of an armed struggle was considered rather, in the late 1990s. Like I said, the people realized that ZANU-PF was a dictatorship, and the only way to remove them from office was either you have an armed struggle or you elect opposition leaders and give them the task of implementing the democratic reforms. In this particular case, the second option was chosen. Yes, 25 years later, ZANU-PF is still rigging the elections. The problem is not with ZANU-PF. The problem is with the opposition. They were elected to implement the democratic reforms to stop ZANU-PF rigging the elections. The question you've got to ask is, why have they failed in 25 years to implement those reforms? And the answer is clear. They sold out. So why would you go for the armed struggle when you can implement the reforms and end the dictatorship? The fact that MDC CCC leaders failed to implement reforms does not mean that no one else can implement them, particularly when we know they failed to implement them because they are corrupt and incompetent. The other argument that must be said here against the armed struggle is that Zimbabwe did have an armed struggle already to end the white colonial rule. And if the truth be told, That armed struggle did not deliver the Zimbabwe we want. This is why we are where we are. We have had ZANU-PF leaders who, when they got into power, turned around and said they have the divine right to rule the country. This is why we are in this mess. So another armed struggle, what guarantees do you have that you will not have the same kind of individuals emerging out of it who think they have the right to rule? And like I said, why would you go for an armed struggle as a solution when you could have a solution of implementing the reforms without an armed struggle? Right now, the chance of getting the reforms implemented, some people will say, well, how are we going to get the reforms implemented? Well, at the present moment, if the people, if Chamisa is stopped from conning millions of people to participate in 2028 elections, ZANU-PF will lose political credibility. SADC and the AU election observers condemned 2023 elections as flawed and illegal. They would have gone one step further and denied the regime legitimacy if millions of Zimbabweans had not participated in those elections. That is where the problem is. We keep participating in our millions in a flawed process. We give the process legitimacy. Why that is so difficult for some people to comprehend beggars belief. Why millions were conned into believing an idiotic lie like, I've plugged all the vote rigging loopholes. Beggars belief. The problem is with the people. Stop the Chamisa Chete Brigade participating in 2028 in their millions, and ZANU-PF will lose political legitimacy. SADC and the AU will deny ZANU-PF legitimacy as they did in 2008. Zimbabwe will be forced to go into another GNU. And this time, we can implement the democratic reforms that will end the ZANU-PF dictatorship. The option of an armed struggle is an option for those who have given up hope. We are failing to think outside the box. We are making the same mistake over and over again. We are so naive and gullible. They believe idiotic lies like, I plugged all the vote rigging loopholes. Hashtag God is in it. That is what ZANU-PF is counting on. That millions will be conned to participate in 2028 on the basis of another idiotic lie. So to come back to the question, is an armed struggle a viable option for Zimbabwe? The simple answer is, it's not. Why would you want to have an armed struggle when the solution can be accomplished without firing a single shot. ZANU-PF is not as invincible as some people would want to believe. Mnangagwa is just a buffoon, an incompetent, corrupt, and murderous thug, yes, but a buffoon nonetheless. Stop Chamisa conning people into participating in flawed elections, and ZANU-PF will lose legitimacy. That is a fact. Think about it. Thank you very much. Have a good evening.